Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
All right, man. We're here. Sweet. Episode numero uno to jump into this whole thing and everything. So I've got Duncan here, the associate pastor of New Hope Community Church. And I'm Josh Huisman here for the very first episode of the Josh Huisman Podcast. And I think probably the best thing to do as we get started into this is just to let the listener know what this podcast is going to be all about and the things that we're going to do. And it's kind of cool to have you here to be my first guest on this show, because we're going to have guests on the show most of the time, I would imagine, but there may be some times when it's just me, and I'll try to carry the conversation as much as I can to the listener. But here's what I think would be cool. Sometimes I get a little bit bored when we go into like the backgrounds of people and we kind of give them their biography and the whole thing. I'm like, man, let's just get to the good stuff and the meat and potatoes. I'm just going to assume because the person on the show is on there that they're a person I can listen to, that there's a reason they're on. So we don't need to go into all the background and all that. But for today, since people have probably no idea for the most part who I am or who you are, my name is Josh Huisman. What's your name?
Duncan.
And we come from two very different parts of the country. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I've been in the Nashville area for 17 years. And how about you?
I grew up in what we call West Texas, even though it's the most northern part of Texas, but the Panhandle in Amarillo, Texas, and moved to Nashville. Been here since May 2018, so 5 years.
Yeah.
Going on 6.
Yeah, and I thought, yesterday I'm the senior pastor of New Hope Community Church in Brentwood, Tennessee, and you are the associate pastor of the church.
Right.
Yesterday we had what we call New Hope 101. We had new members join the church, and you lead our New Hope 101 class. And then I meet with the people who go through it, and they can ask questions about the church and all of these things. And so someone asked me yesterday in New Hope 101 about my calling into ministry and how that all began. And, these are the kind of things that I kind of think to myself would bore most people. But yet I get asked this question over and over again. Like, how did it all start? How did you know getting into ministry was something that you wanted to do? And each time I get asked that question, I start it and go, well, let me give you the short answer to that. And then it turns into like this 15, 20-minute conversation, So I thought, why not spend a little bit of time in this very first episode talking about ministry calling and how we get into this whole thing? Because you have a pretty cool story, I think. My story is kind of unique as well. And I wouldn't say unique, but I would say definitely where God kind of stepped in and showed me that he was up to something. And so how about let's start with you, because I'm the senior pastor of the church.
Sure.
We were in a situation going back to, I think it was like 2018 or 17. You remember what year it was?
So I interviewed in 2018. I started in 2018.
Okay.
So it would have been before that.
Yeah. And so we had a position at the church that we had someone who covered basically making sure that we had bulletins and making sure we had things in print and things of that nature. Somebody who could change things on our website that we had, but we had kind of sourced that out to another company who made our website. If we had to change something, we'd have to send them an email, do this whole thing, and wait for them to respond. And sometimes it would take a while, And then we had somebody who was recording our worship services and then being able to put our messages online. But for me, there was this vision that kind of started to say, we want to look for somebody who can bring this all in-house and who has the skills to really become a creator in this space and could take us, whether it's websites or video or any of this stuff that we want to do. If we can dream it, we want to have someone here who can put it in place. You were that guy.
Yeah. That's nice. I guess so.
You totally were. Like, I think, just for anyone listening, if you go to newhopechurchtn.org, Austin creates all this stuff. If you go to our live stream and the things that we do and the video and the production, when you look at what we do as a church, it would be very easy for someone to think, wow, that's a mega church. That is a church that has thousands and thousands of people there. And I mean, just look at the way things are done and on such a quality level. And you, along with, at the time, we had another guy here who was on staff who has since moved on, named Pete Wells, pulled together this production studio and cameras and all of this and websites and everything that works together and apps.
Yeah.
And made it possible to happen. You know, so how did that come about? Like, how did you get started doing all that kind of work? And how did you know you wanted to do that in the church world? That would be an interesting.
Yeah. So it's interesting, I guess, because my background I guess it goes all the way back to like my sophomore year in high school. For whatever reason, I don't remember how it necessarily started, but I had this dream that I wanted to work at Pixar, and that was like what I wanted to do. So like everything was geared towards that, and I just wanted to get into that world as much as I could, which started with graphic design. And it's kind of funny because that was the dream, and then I ended up getting into a graphic design class in high school that we were supposed to have a studio art prerequisite that I just took in stuff that I just made at my house and asked if I could skip the art class, and the graphic design teacher let me, which was awesome. And then it was in that very first graphic design class that I was like, oh, I don't want to work at Pixar anymore. I just would rather just do graphic design because I loved that. So it all started really just in high school wanting to do graphic design and art. And I was lucky in the fact, I guess, that I like knew what I wanted to do as a career at 15 years old. So it made it possible just to pursue that pretty strongly, which I did, and then went into college. And as a lot of degrees have, my degree it's a super long title that basically is just a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design. Yeah. So that's really what it is. It's
so cool. You know, you have such a gift in that area and the things that you're able to do and to create. And even if you just, like I said, go to our things of what we do and things that you have put together, you clearly see, man, God has gifted you in that area. Thanks. And I think one of the things in this podcast from time to time, I think it's going to be about a number of things. First off, it's going to be a conversational podcast. And
sure.
And I'm going into all this because I think I'm going to always point people back to this first episode and to say, hey, if you want to know what the Josh Huisman Podcast is all about, go listen to that first episode, because there's going to be times where I think I'm going to share about leadership decisions, successes and failures. And I think we're going to like even life coaching and things that we can do to help people. Right. Then I think there's going to be ministry things that we can talk about, that I'll have guests on here where we talk about going through the process of ministry, how things come about, how God is working and moving. Because I think a lot of times people are curious to go, hey, what's your story? Like, how did you get here? Or how has God been working in your life? And that's one of the reasons why I have you on here and we're talking about this, because you do have a unique story in that, because we've already started saying you had this clear gift of graphic design and building and creating, and you're going down this path. And I will tell you even behind the scenes a little bit. So as a church, we had a decision to make, and this really went into leadership vision at the time, because we had a process as a church of how we went about and how we were doing things. And in order to get to where we needed to be, it required a change in how we did things. And, you know, even as we sit today, and here we are in this podcast studio in a place where it didn't exist, right?
Sure. Yeah.
We had to create this space. And I have a friend who used to say to me all the time, you'll never be as good, or that's not how he was going to say. It was something along the lines of this. The people you surround yourself with, I mean, you can only go as far as the abilities of those who are around you. So it doesn't mean that, hey, well, I had a bad group of people around me or anything like that. I had great people around me. That wasn't it. It was, as far as the vision goes for what God wanted us to do as a church, we had to kind of change and bring in some folks who wanted us, or who had the abilities to take us in that direction, right?
Right.
But it was tough because, like, one of the things, you and I have joked about this before, you came in and you were interviewing, and like a lot of the questions were like, so tell us about how you do bulletins, and tell us about how you do printouts.
Yes.
and then on the side, I said, hey, so a lot of these questions are going to be about the way we already kind of do things, but I'm interested in the future and what we're going to be accomplishing. So like have your eyes focused on that. Do you remember that at all?
I do, yeah. It's funny because I'm glad you prepped me for that, because I remember thinking at the beginning of it, like I had, trying to word it carefully, like little interest in bulletins, like creating those at the beginning. But it was comforting to hear you say that as I was interviewing and talking to you about the position here and all of that, because it kind of solidified for me that we both had a similar vision, and that my desire and skill set and background and different positions that I had leading up to coming to New Hope was all in like website, video, those kind of things, which is cool to see how it's developed into what it is now. But yeah, so it was nice to be prepped with like the focus kind of on, I guess for lack of a better term, analog kind of way of doing things to the embracing like technology moving forward, which is a lot of like where my skill set lies and where it was back then too. So yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, and maybe I could talk about my background just a little bit too. So I've been here at the church that I'm currently the pastor of, New Hope, for 17 years. I started in youth ministry at New Hope in 2006, but even before that, I was doing youth ministry in a town called South Holland, Illinois, which is a town I grew up in. And I have this long background. I grew up in a family of athletes, baseball players, and that was always my dream. Like that was what I wanted to do. My older brother Jason plays, my younger brother Justin plays, and they were great baseball players. I had a lot of friends who were playing, and that was kind of my world, right? And growing up playing with my brothers, and we're all within 3 years of each other, and so we got pretty good playing against each other, and we were blessed enough to find ourselves, all three of us, playing at the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, hotty toddy. I think it was 97 or 98, I can't remember, where all three of us, 98, where all three of us were on the team together. And so Justin was a freshman, I was a junior, and Jason was a senior. There'd be times when I'd be playing first base, Jason's playing shortstop, Justin's playing third base. Our second baseman is Brad Henderson, who was a superstar SEC player in his own right. And we would, when we were in the lineup together, we'd bat 3, 4, 5 in the lineup. And I was like, this is, hey, this is kind of the dream. This is where I think that's what I wanted to do, because making millions of dollars is not a bad thing.
Nope.
Nope. So that's, that was kind of the dream. During that same time, I meet a friend, a guy named JT, who he's playing guitar and he's a worship leader in our FCA group. And I really noticed that when he would play guitar and lead worship, that like the girls like that too. So I was like,
Sure.
wow, I should really learn how to play guitar. My motives were completely not in the right.
Money and girls.
Yeah. So you could see that the Lord had to work on my heart in some massive ways. And long story short, so I got my mom's a musician, plays piano, plays guitar, singer, all that. And so she had an extra guitar. I get one from her. I just start learning it. God bless my brothers who had to listen to this as I try to learn guitar in the apartment. All three of us living together, And so going into, that junior year in Division I baseball is kind of that year. It's a big year when you're talking about if you're going to get drafted, you're eligible to get drafted. And if you have a great year, good things can happen. And I really had worked hard going into my junior season to get in good shape, best shape that I think I'd ever been in. And one thing after another went wrong. Nothing went right. I didn't play as much as I thought I should. I wasn't as good as I probably thought I was. And things just didn't work out. And I remember that feeling of a dream that you've worked your whole life toward, just kind of coming to an end. And around that time in the spring so it was that spring season, I get asked to share my testimony at this church that's right on the main drag, and I can't remember the name of the road in Oxford. And they asked me to come and share testimony. So I was like, well, maybe I'll play a song on my guitar and I'll share my testimony. And so I write out my testimony, and it was all about, I played the song. You ever heard the artist Chris Rice?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he had a song in his first album called Sometimes Love Has to Drive a Nail. I think it's called Sometimes Love. But the idea of it is like sacrifice. Sometimes love has to drive a nail through its own hand. And listen, if I went back and listened to what I said, I'm sure it was terrible. I don't know. But in my mind, I was thinking, here I was thinking I'm going to have a good season. And it turned out my older brother had like a career year.
Wow.
So he actually broke the home run record at Ole Miss that year. And it was the record that stood until last year when Tim Elko broke it.
Wow.
Which so what? I mean, I don't know how long that was. Can you do quick math? I also wasn't very good at math. There's 1998 to 2022. So there you go.
Yeah,
24 years. 24 years. Okay.
I'm not good at math either.
So we've solved this problem. Anyway, he has like this career year, and it's amazing. And I was like thinking, I thought I was going to have a pretty decent year, and then he ends up destroying the record book, which was awesome.
Yeah.
So deserved. But I give this testimony that was basically me saying, hey, like I kind of feel like this baseball thing is coming to an end while I have family members who are.
Yeah.
And as I like sang that song, and as I'm sharing that testimony, I remember thinking, like I got to the end of it, I remember like people are like actually listening. Like they're paying attention like to me doing this. And so I go back and I look at that time, and even I recently went back to Oxford for a football game. I was walking down that street. Every time I pass that church, like I look at that church and I just think that's kind of like the roots of God first letting me know that I would be doing this, and that I would be called into ministry. And so I could share like several stories in the process of that.
Yeah.
Because I graduated college. My wife, Sarah, graduated college a year later. She went to South Alabama. We got married in August 2000. And for 3 years, I kind of jumped around with some different things. I was trying to do some music stuff and things like that. But it was like pretty aimless. And there was one night where we're like, listen, this is like, what am I going to do with my life? I mean, I want to do this music thing because I enjoy playing music, but I don't know that that's it. And so we lived in Franklin, Kentucky, which is like an hour north of Nashville. Excuse me. And we went for a walk around the block, and we just were praying, like, God, what are we supposed to do? Like, we need like clear direction, right?
Right.
And go to bed that night, not thinking anything of it. And the next morning, literally, my mom calls and says, hey, our church, which is the church I grew up in, it's called King's Community. It's on the south side of Chicago. We need a youth pastor. And Pastor Pete, who's the pastor of the church there, he just wanted me to give you a call and see, are you interested in this? I know you're living down there. You're trying to do this music thing. And I was like,
that's cool.
Well, and so I got a notebook out, and I was like, I've never even like written a message or anything like that. But in that moment, my mind went back to that church in Oxford, Mississippi. And it was like, I think I can do this. And Sarah, I think, was 4 or 5 months pregnant with our oldest son, Tyler, at that time. So this is not a time to be like making big changes. And so anyway, I got a notebook out, got the Bible out, and just started kind of seeing what was there, and started going page after page of filling up like notes. Now you got to remember, like, nobody had asked me to really get up and speak or teach, or so when you go like, were you called into ministry? Like, I was literally phone called,
literally called into ministry,
phone called into ministry, and that was 2003. I believe it was 2003, and just began this process, and then over time I did that youth ministry there for 3 years, but Sarah and I always loved the Nashville area. I mean, it was one of those things where like we have family in Chicago, but we'd love to stay here, but man, if we could ever go back to that Brentwood, Nashville area, we would love to be there,
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I could go on and on about this, but I want to ask you about your story a little bit. But like, it was really fascinating to see how even from the beginning, being called into ministry in that way, that even when there are difficult seasons, and believe me, they're every other week, but no, maybe not that much. But when there are difficult seasons, like, I think it's so important to know, like, God has his hand upon you in a calling of ministry, because if it's not, or if you're just trying to force something that God's hand is not on that, you will very quickly become very discouraged.
Oh yes. Yep, for sure.
And so the reason why I want to talk about with you calling of ministry is because we kind of started this off saying with working in communications, with working in website and design and all that kind of stuff. But you, in the back of your mind, always felt like there was more.
Yes.
Like you wanted to go into a more an out front ministry as opposed to a behind the scenes. And like, how did that work out for you? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah. So, and I think like those starts, that thought in the back of my mind started my second senior year in college. Whenever I think it was my second senior year.
Your second senior year?
Yeah, victory lap is what I called it. So, yeah, I had several semesters where I decided to take 9 hours in a semester, which is not as many as you would need to graduate in 4 years in college. So I graduated in 5 years. It took an extra year, but some of those semesters were awesome, where I would be done with class by like 10:30 in the morning. So it was great.
What a time in life. You ever look back on that and just go, I should have cherished that more?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Finish with the day at 10:30. It's like still, if the teacher let us out early, that's still time to get like breakfast at McDonald's by the time your day's done.
Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Right. I'm gonna have lunch, and then after that, who knows?
Yep. So that second senior year, my family, the church we grew up in, one of the pastors there, he just ended up, just through like what ministry does, just ended up leaving that church to be a pastor at another church in Los Angeles, and then ended up being the senior pastor of a church in Las Vegas called, at the time it was Central Christian Church. I think now they just go by Central Church. His name's Judd Wilhite, and we used to go out to Las Vegas quite a bit. And when we were out there, we would visit his church and sometimes have dinner with him and those kind of things. And I think it was in 2012 or so, we were having dinner with him, I think at Chili's in Henderson. I could be wrong, but he...
Did you get the skillet queso? I mean, how do you go to Chili's and
would
not?
imagine.
So, yes. Okay. There you go.
Yeah. And so I remember sitting next to him, and he asked what I was going to be doing like the next year in college and internships and those kind of things. And I told him I didn't really have an idea as far as internship stuff goes. And he's like, well, why don't you send if you want to intern in a church, why don't you send an application this way, and I'll just get it where it needs to go, which was a great phrase to hear, to have a family friend just be like, send it out and you can have an internship.
Yeah.
So that was good.
At a very high profile church, where having that opportunity to get started there. Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
Yeah, it was amazing. And so my boss there, I ended up obviously getting that internship. And so my boss there later was telling me how Judd did that I think he basically just like walked in with my application. He's like, hey, I got you an intern, and set it on his desk, which was great. But so I ended up being the graphic design intern for just the high school ministry at the main campus, which was hundreds of kids on a Sunday. And so that's like, the size of a good sized church, just like anywhere else. So it was kind of just like thrown in kind of feet first into the deep end of like graphic design in the church world, at least. And so it was great, and I loved doing that. But then there was a camp, which at the time, if you knew me at the time, I was very shy and didn't really like to talk that much to people and all of that, which is like why I was going to school to basically be behind a camera, because I didn't want to be in front of a camera. And that's worked out really well with my job now. So but anyway, there was a camp coming up for the high school, and the guy that I was working for, the boss, he was asking hey, would you want to go? They didn't have enough counselors, so he said, would you want to go to camp and you can be the counselor for, I think it was 7 kids that were going from 8th grade into high school, and it's super easy. Many of the counselors have like 23 or 25 kids, and you'd only have like 7. You'd have 2 rooms, so it'd be real easy to manage. And I just told him, like, no, I don't think I want to do that. And he said I wasn't really asking. So
yeah, right.
I went to camp for counseling those kids and found out that several of them were atheists, and found that out like the first time that we sat down around a table and went through the questions that were about like the message that night. And so yeah, I think 4 of them told me, or 3 or 4 of them told me that they were atheists and like they didn't really want to be there, that their parents made them come to camp and that sort of stuff.
Could you tell that when they were there? Like, were they kind of standoffish in that, or were they telling you this after the fact?
No, so I didn't know, because I didn't know any of them really that well before, and I think I would have. The camp was like kind of midway into my time there, and with them coming up into high school, they like hadn't been to any of the high school stuff that I was a part of at that time.
Yeah.
So that was kind of like their first like thing into high school. So I didn't really know them all that well into camp, and didn't, just the way it was organized, I didn't really get to talk to them really all that well until like that moment. That was kind of like the first time that like we sat down as a group to talk really.
Yeah.
And so, but like in the day before that, when we were like in our rooms and stuff, they were just like friend, like they weren't standoffish or anything like that, just super friendly and nice and all of that. So you're leading them in this group and you're having this experience, and then so what happened? Yeah. So just slowly over the week, at first they didn't want to like answer any questions or talk or anything along those lines, which was fine. I understood, because I didn't want to be there to begin with either. So I told them though that they at least had to sit at the table with us and listen, or not listen. I don't care. They just had to like sit at the table with us, because they couldn't be wandering off, and I have no idea where 4 kids went out of my 7. It wouldn't look very good. So I was like, you at least have to stay here. And then as the week went along, they started asking, like the first couple times they were just quiet, which was fine. And then afterwards it was just like kids hanging out. But as the week went along, they started asking more questions and answering more questions than the kids that like had grown up in church. So I could tell that there's like the Holy Spirit was kind of moving in them throughout the week.
Yeah.
And then eventually by the last day of the camp there, so like even before we loaded the buses to come home, at some point during the week, each kid had come to me like one-on-one and told me that they'd accepted Christ that week, which was awesome. And even I've told that story a million times, but even like now still gives me chills saying it out loud.
Yeah, right.
Because it kind of takes me like right back to that moment. And it wasn't like necessarily a set moment, but it like, just a moment over that week that I was like, oh, I think this is what I want to be doing, which was cool and kind of scary, because I had like I'm almost finished with college doing something totally different. And so I'm like, I think this is what I want to be doing. And then as like my human nature has, the internship finished up, went back to college, and just started like pursuing again a career in graphic design and web development and all that sort of stuff that, but still like with that thought just kind of in the back of my mind. And really where I knew that I wanted to be in a church doing those things, I didn't necessarily know what like the ministry world would look like for me. And I don't know that I necessarily cared too much. I just knew I wanted to like be doing something in ministry. And that came from just at the places that I was working before New Hope. Like they would start out great and I loved them, and then it eventually turned into like the only thing that was on my mind was not liking being at those places, and that I would rather just be in a church doing the same thing. It was interesting, because it was almost like almost as like if you skipped lunch that day, all you're thinking about is going to lunch. That's like how it was. Just I need to be doing this in a church.
Yeah.
And so it turned into sending out, at least at the first position, and thankfully with God's will, none of those landed, because I am very happy with where I've ended up now. But like sending out a ton of applications just to churches, like at any capacity, and then that desire eventually grew to where I thought I did want to be like a senior pastor or a pastor in a church somewhere. Yeah. And so.
It's really interesting, and I want to get back into like how, because you're our associate pastor now, but you didn't come here as our associate pastor, so no. I want to get to that in a second. But it's fascinating how when you talk about getting started in ministry and things like that, when Sarah and I were living in Franklin, Kentucky, and we were working for the most part in Bowling Green, Kentucky. This is between 2000 and 2003. And I was working part-time jobs and also trying to get some music thing going where I had a band and I would write songs and things like that. And I used to like sit in church and I would have a church bulletin and I would write song lyrics on the back of the church bulletin. And I'd like to tell you that I was listening to the past. I probably should. I mean, it's kind of funny that I do what I do today. But there was one particular Sunday where there was a message going on, and it was kind of given maybe a look at I don't know. I could make something up right now, but I'm thinking it was whatever it was. I felt like God was kind of giving me a vision for something. Mm-hmm. And I wrote on the bulletin, "It starts now." Mm. And I kept that bulletin for a while. I wish I still had it. And I wrote, "It starts now." And I felt like God was saying to me in that moment, the music thing, like this music career is going to start now. You try to do this baseball thing and that came to an end. And now you want to do this music thing and have a band and maybe even travel and do some touring and all that kind of stuff. And it starts now. But that story I told earlier, it was not long after that I got the phone call.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
Isn't that interesting?
It is,
so
yeah.
It starts now. What I thought was a music thing. Actually, it was God saying, no, the ministry thing starts now. And I look back on that and I want to I wish I could go and tap myself on the shoulder and be like, hey, you think this is about something totally different? Because if you had told me at the time, hey, one day you'll be living in, Nashville, Tennessee, you'll be the senior pastor of a church, you'll be talking to a guy named Austin Duncan doing the first episode of the podcast, and you're going to be talking about ministry call. I would have been like, what are you talking about?
Right.
You're insane, But again, I go back to every single time, and I have, again, several other stories that I could share about how God has kind of given me little markers along the way.
Right.
To show that in the moments when things are difficult in ministry or even when things are great, hey, listen, it's been God's hand on me all along in that. Mm-hmm. And so when I started then in youth ministry, I even had said, hey, listen, I'll do youth ministry, but one thing I'll never be is a senior pastor of a church. I'm not going to be that guy who's up there preaching and who's doing the, pastors. I think they're the nicest. They're the nicest people. but for me, I was like, in fact, I even remember, to be honest with you, there was a senior pastor of a church in Bowling Green, Rich Pond Baptist. Steve Hussong is his name. And I'll probably have him on this podcast at some point if he'll come on.
Yeah.
But I remember sitting in the pew and he came up and tapped me on, how you doing? I'm Pastor Steve. I'm the pastor. I was like, why is he talking to me? This is weird, And now I am one of those guys. And I can pretty much see when someone's going, why is he talking to me? I know what that's like. Anyway, so, there's a whole process then too, how I moved into a senior leadership role in ministry and all that stuff. But let's talk about you, because you came here as I think your title was communications director.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, New Hope is we're a medium-sized church, mm-hmm. not huge or anything. We're doing great things.
Right.
But you had an opportunity to go on to something bigger in the communications world.
I did, yeah.
Right? And so,
mm-hmm.
how did that come about? And let's talk about how this got you to what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah. So, oh, man, I wish I remembered what year it was. I think 2020, maybe? It was
COVID had already either been going on, either just started or it had been going on for a year.
Okay.
All I know is I was in Arizona. That's all I know.
Yeah.
And you called me.
Yeah. It was that would have been in maybe 2020 or early 2021 then.
Okay.
And I originally ended up getting a phone call from the church that I grew up in back in Texas, which is, they're a huge church with 11 campuses. And I know it's not all about numbers. I don't even know the number of people at the main campus. I think it's in the thousands. Mm-hmm. A lot of them are. And so, I ended up getting a phone call from them And the phone call just kind of went along the lines of, like, would I be interested in hearing about, like, an opportunity that they'd be willing to have for me, and in their phrasing, like, to come back home and work in a church there.
Yeah.
And so...
to come back home.
Right.
Yeah, those guys. They're trying to take you from me.
I was like, it's clever wording, but... And then, like... At the same time, I was like, I think that wording's kind of working too, maybe. But and it really worked too, because like my dad has cancer and all of that, so it was like that weighed on it as well. Of like, well, I maybe should.
Yeah,
I don't know.
You want to be home with him. I mean,
Sure.
to kind of be there with him as he's going through this treatments and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah. And so it was convincing, and my response was like, sure, I'll hear about whatever opportunity you want to send to me. I'll listen to you.
Yeah.
Basically ended up turning into like talking to them for a while, and they ended up extending a job offer to me to be a position that I found out later had created with me in mind, like for me.
Right.
They didn't name it like lead graphic designer or graphic design director or communications. It wasn't like graphic design specific, how a lot of them are. I think senior graphic designer is like the industry term for someone in that industry.
Okay.
And so instead the position was called lead designer. And the way it was communicated to me was it was going to be a position that was basically over just the design of the church itself at all 11 campuses. So it would include graphic design, but it would also include just the way that things were done as well. Like if I went into the main sanctuary and the way that the stage setup was with like lights and everything, if it seemed out of brand or, just kind of out of left field for what the church was and how their look was and all of that, then that position had the authority to change it.
Yeah.
Or to say it needed to be changed, and that carries some weight to it. And so in the church world, they're one of the, I think if you look up like largest churches in America, I don't know where they'll land, but they're on the list somewhere. And so,
sure.
As far as like the graphic design world goes in the church world, then that's like the major leagues of getting into that kind of position that it doesn't really necessarily get like higher than that, unless you end up at like Hillsong or Elevation or those like international churches that people know like crazy.
Right.
But anyway, it was a huge opportunity, especially in that world. But
so in the eyes of like basically the world, when it comes to what you have your degree in, so you've got money invested into this thing, like this is where you're supposed to go, and now you want to go to the top and whatever it may be. And I'm sure you could even, with that experience that you were going to gain in that situation, you could even then make that even go into next level stuff, even beyond that or whatever it may be, right?
Right.
Except, so you would just call me, and I don't even know what your original intentions are when you called. I think it seemed like you were more in a place of going, hey, what should I do here?
Oh, absolutely.
And so you just kind of let me know, heck, here's this offer
that
I'm being given. And here's what I will tell you. This, for me, when you were talking to me about this is where I was able to draw on a similar experience that I had. Because about 4 or 5 years earlier, it might have even been more than that at that point, I had a similar thing happen where a church that was in the area where I grew up was kind of looking for a new youth minister in a big church. And I was just talking with them, and I kind of had a decision to make. So if I go with them into youth ministry, then I'm making a decision like, this is life. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go all in on youth ministry, and that's where I'm going to be, which is many are called to that, and it's wonderful.
Right.
Youth ministry is the front lines of stuff going on in culture and all that, But in the back, I don't want to say the back of my heart, I don't know how to phrase that.
Yeah.
It always just felt like, oh yeah, I don't know that that's it.
You're right.
I feel like God might be saying there's something more.
Right.
And you kind of had that going on. So I went, I came back to the church here and told our elders at New Hope, I said, hey, this is going on. I got this other opportunity and I don't know what to do. It's really good. I mean, like the size of the church is up there. Like the youth ministry staff that I would have been over was bigger than the staff of the entire church here.
Right.
At New Hope. And first off, I wasn't qualified to do that. I don't even know why they were looking at me. But then second off, I was like, man, I'll get to be the guy who's speaking at conferences and acting like I know what I'm talking about, even though I've really not even done anything. Right? I'm just going on the coattails of everybody who's gone before, and everyone's listening to me. But I came back to New Hope, and they said, "Hey, if you stay here, we see you might be senior leadership. Like you could be our senior pastor one day." And I was like, "Wow!" Like I hadn't even. That's really interesting. And so you kind of had something like that.
I did, yeah.
Happen.
Yeah, so after they extended that offer to me, I, like you said, called you because I didn't know what to do. And just wanted to talk to you about it. And I felt I felt horrible because I knew you were not even here. You were in Arizona. Yeah. And didn't want to bother you. But
I was on a golf trip.
Yeah. But it was the timing of it. It was sort of like a time pressing thing. Yeah. I was like, I don't know that.
I think they gave you a deadline.
They did.
I think they said we want to know by such and such a date.
So. Yeah. So and I'd had the offer for a little while, and I was just thinking and praying about it myself, and then really was just waiting for you to get back in town, and then I was going to talk to you in person about it, which is how I would have rather have done that.
Sure.
But they did. They gave me a deadline. I think it was like a couple of days or something like that, or maybe it was a week. But regardless, it necessitated that I had to call you while you were on vacation. So, yeah, I did, and just kind of brought up what it was and all of that sort of stuff. And I remember like the advice that you gave me. It was just kind of like, it was interesting. I'm trying to think of the right way to word it too, is like weighing the conversations that I had with them and then the conversations that I had with you. Really, it just kind of made me think of like, what is it that God's calling me to do, or where I think I should be in the church. Yeah. Which, as I told my family and wife Cassie at the time and all that, is I was just thinking back to like the Austin that was in these like ad agencies and stuff, that was just like spending every waking moment wanting to work in a church, and like here I was with this opportunity. So I was thinking, and this is like, however this goes, this is like, I would be thanking God for this problem just like 5 years ago. Right. But I remember you bringing up if I saw myself going into the pastoral world of things, I think the way and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the advice you gave was to ask them if like the pastoral avenue was something that would even be a possibility in the future in that role.
Yeah, I think how we kind of started down that path was when you had said, I don't know that you asked me flat out, what should I do?
I don't think I did.
Which is, because you didn't, but like you could tell that you were kind of conflicted. Right. Because if you really wanted to do that, you would have just done it. Right. So why are you calling me? Other than to say, right. If you were going to do it, you would have said, hey, listen, I got this job opportunity. It's too good to pass up. And so when the fact that you were calling made me go, I'm just going to ask you the question. And I think I asked you, well, what do you see yourself doing in the church? Like, right. What do you feel called by God to do? Mm-hmm. And that was the first time that I ever heard you say, I actually would probably like to be a senior pastor at some point, someday. Right. And then that was like, well, that's not lead designer for a church. Right. That's an entirely different thing. And I think it was, well, how I would ask them, how do they see you?
Oh yeah. Yep.
What? Yeah. Okay. So you see that God has that for you, like this is something on the horizon. And I will say, just to affirm you in that, I remember thinking to myself, and I've told you this on the side, just who you are as a person, how you interact with people, just your care for people, the way you go about things and about yourself, about how you interact with people. I mean, you have those senior pastor qualities. Even when you were doing communications and you were doing all that stuff, it doesn't mean, hey, you were doing things perfect, because I don't do things perfect either. You know? I mean, listen.
I haven't done things perfect today.
Exactly. So that's not what we're talking about. It's just more overall, do people gravitate towards you? And if I were to say, hey, Austin wants to be a senior pastor one day, someone would go, yes, I can see that. And I think that's where I was when we were having that conversation. Right. And so I think you then reached back out to them and said, hey, how do you see me?
Right. I did. Yeah. And I asked if either that role or just even myself, like if the opportunity would be there to like explore a pastoral like side of things in that church. And the answer I got back was just, and they said it nicely, of course, but the answer I got back was no.
Yeah.
At least in that church and in that role, which I'm sure they had like very specific ways that those positions are filled and all those kind of things. But either way, the answer was like no for that. At least in that position wouldn't ever lead to that kind of thing, just ever. So that's like top of the ladder for that position, just moving forward.
Right.
And yeah, and with those things, like especially thinking back to the experience that I'd had at Central with those kids, not me, but just seeing the Holy Spirit work in those kids to bring them to Christ over the week, that was like the point in which I decided, or I knew that I wanted to be in the church.
Yeah.
Doing anything.
Well, and I think what's so important about that, like even, those positions, like the lead designer, like the behind the scenes positions and the things in the church, that they're so vitally important. Right. And I think God works in everyone who's working in the kingdom of God.
Oh, absolutely.
If you're doing it for his glory. I think like in your case, and in my case, it's just when you feel like, but God has something else for you. Right. That as great as that looks and as wonderful as that might be, and that's going to be wonderful for somebody else.
100%, yeah.
God has something else for you.
Right. Well, and it was thinking back to that moment, it was specifically the teaching and the conversations with those kids that I recognized was like way more fulfilling than any graphic design work I'd ever done. Like even since. Yeah. If I went back to that was more, I can like pinpoint almost like specifically remember just that week and like specific moments of those week. And every one of those kids coming up to me and telling me that, I can still just like go there mentally and remember it.
And it really is funny because at that point, I had not heard you preach. I had not
I hadn't
heard you teach. I don't think you had even gotten up in front of in a congregational setting and taught or preached.
Right.
And so I remember even when I went to the elders of New Hope and I said, I think, Austin, we see this in him. He wants to do this. He feels called by God to do this. We were going through some changes in the staff at the church and like, well, who are we going to bring on and kind of be an associate and start preaching? And I said, let's go with Austin. And they said, well, let's talk about his preaching background. I said, he hasn't yet. I got him scheduled next month. Let's see how this goes. Right. But again, that it was just built off the quality, first off, of who you are as a person. Right. It was built off that. Right. And knowing that you would put the time in to study and the work you do. You had been writing a blog and you had been doing stuff like that in ministry. And then giving you the opportunity to grow into that role. Because I'm a relatively young pastor as well. I'm in my mid-40s. And so I'm preaching. I'm not going anywhere for a while. So you really have a real great opportunity to just hone your craft as a preacher and as a teacher without the pressures of having to be a senior pastor now.
Oh, absolutely.
So we got you into seminary. You're doing seminary work now, and you lead our Connect groups and small groups, adult groups, and then you're able to preach when you need to, and you still handle really a big chunk along with our worship guy Sutton over here, who's our production guy. Sutton, say hello to the folks.
Hello, everyone.
He's over here behind the scenes working. So we'll ask him to jump in every once in a while. But I mean, here's what's really cool about what I think it's cool. You guys might be like, actually, we've been meaning to talk to you about this, but we all kind of have our hands in different things, and I think it's because we all want everything to be as great as it can be as a church. We don't operate in silos in the ministries here. We don't say, hey, this is my area, get your hands off. Right. Like I think we're all, in fact, the three of us in this room work together on quite a bit of things in each other's area of ministry, And so so that's right. You're still wearing a lot of hats.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. And it's just cool how it's all kind of come about too, in the opportunity to be able to preach and step more into the pastoral side of things that, like I've said a couple of times now too, was something that was ever since college was kind of in the back of my mind. Yeah. And there was conversations there with even Judd back then, telling him that I wanted to be a senior pastor, and him telling me just get as involved as you can in the church, which only affirmed what I was feeling of getting involved in the church. But to still be able to do the things that God gave me talent to do, which is like the graphic design and branding and web development, all that sort of stuff. It's like I don't think I could have envisioned it better than it's turned out. Just even if I created a dream job.
Well,
so
and
it's cool.
You still like to do that, right?
Oh yeah,
and we love that you do it too, because you do a great job with it. And then you get to preach and you get to go along this path that God has for you. You know, like when I talked about me and doing music and things like that, I have no desire to be a worship pastor full time. I'm a senior pastor and love being in that role. But I got Sutton here, who is 1,000 times better than I would ever be as a worship pastor. But he lets me get up there every once in a while and lead,
right,
and play, and that's awesome. It like scratches that itch, but it, make no mistake, because I'll have someone go, I know that's your first love. That's what you want. I was like, no. I love doing it.
Right.
But I prefer him doing it. Yes. but it helps me use that gift every once in a while, and not feel like I have to shut a door on it.
Right.
So, because I do remember when I first entered senior pastor world, I remember thinking, well, now everything else has to die.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I can't be anything else, and this is what I'm supposed to be, or if not, I'm in the pursuit of myself, and that's it. And that is such a, you know what? Because I'd have people who would say that line of garbage to me, and it took me a while to like overcome that and just realize that was more their insecurities than it was mine.
Right.
So, anyway, so long story short, I think what's so cool and why I love having you on here for the first episode to talk about this is because, one, for me, I had some experiences in being called to a ministry position, and then having opportunities, and then trying to go, man, what do I do with that?
Right.
And then I had to make a decision in it. And I think, and God has been faithful in the decision that he led me to.
Right. And
then I think John Maxwell says this, like, experience is not a good teacher, like learned experience is the good teacher and the best teacher. And what he means is we all experience something, but if you don't actually take the time to look back on it and learn from it, like what is the lesson?
Oh yeah.
And then when your situation came along, I was like, oh, I've been through, I know exactly what you're feeling and whatever, and I could apply it to that. And I think a lot of times people go through things and they're like, why am I going through this difficulty or this trouble with a decision? And if you just sit down and take the time to go, okay, God, what are you trying to teach me in this?
Right.
Then when something down the road comes up, you can go back and you can help somebody else.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I agree 100%. And I think one of like the things that I've even shared with people later, just not even in New Hope, that you said to me in one of those phone calls too, was that, at least what I got from you in those phone calls was that it wasn't like you were trying to like convince me to stay here, but just trying to help me figure out what it was that the Holy Spirit was calling me to do. And I remember that like one of the first things that you said was saying like I could say a number of things to you, but really I don't want to get in the way of whatever the Holy Spirit's doing. Yeah. And so that just opened it up for me to be able to ask questions and have that discussion, which like that phrase of not getting in the way of what the Holy Spirit's wanting to do is like, that's like gave some of the most clear perspective that I had in figuring out what to do in those moments.
Well, I appreciate you making me sound very spiritual in that. Because inside I was going, please, Lord, he needs to stay right where he is.
Well,
and and so so that's really, really cool about that. So like what are some final things you would share with someone who's maybe whether they're in leadership or even if they're like operating in something that might be a gifting of theirs, but they're kind of feeling like, hey, maybe God has something else out there. Is there anything you would share to someone if they called you now and had like the similar situation?
Yeah. And it's kind of, the advice or the thought that I have, that at least what I've followed from right out of college till now. It's not necessarily, I don't know if it's necessarily the most comforting thing or like practical thing, but it's what I did, which was just at least for me, like the call into the church world was something that was like so great that I couldn't ignore it.
Right.
And so really at the end of the day, what I did was just pray to the Lord that that I would have the wisdom or the discernment to be able to follow where He's leading me as those doors open.
Yeah.
And to have the bravery to step away from the things that that aren't where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it's really hard in those moments too, just to trust that like trust in the Lord that where I'm going is the correct place. Because in those times, there's moments where I wasn't working anywhere for like 6 months pursuing just freelance graphic design work and having my own graphic design like registered company and that sort of stuff. And that I just knew that the secular world of graphic design wasn't something that was going to work for me long term, and having to just leave that and trust that God was going to still provide with seeking His will. And I think those can be some of like the most challenging times when you don't know or you don't have like a concrete next step, but just seeking His will is it's not a bad bet to make. It's like that's the way to go, and it's hard, especially when you don't know like what that necessarily is going to look like next.
Yeah. Well, you did something so cool that I would recommend to a lot of people. And I know, I mean, I know I did this too, but it wasn't because I knew what I was doing. It really is more something I stumbled upon, is when you have big life decisions to make in career or family or whatever. I think we have a tendency sometimes to want to keep that secretive and keep it to ourselves and internal.
Right. And
we pray and we ask the Lord for direction, and then we don't seek outside counsel as much as we should, and the very fact, I'm your boss,
right?
And you're calling me about another job.
Yeah.
And what should I do?
Right.
I mean, it takes some guts, honestly, to do that. I know I did it very similar where someone might give you advice and say, don't do that because they might get rid of you. But I think you did that because you trusted me that
absolutely.
I wasn't going to like cut your knees out from under you or
right.
or any of that. And I think, the fact that you said it was like your home church too. And for me, like my first thing was a home church deal.
Yeah. I spent 25 years going there.
There was an element in that. I remember our conversations, like going back to that. Well, how do they see you?
Right.
I've talked about this quite a bit. The people who I grew up with and the friends who I grew up with and family and different things, there'll be times still, I've been in ministry now 20 some years and I'll be like, I'm a pastor. Like, well, you're a pastor? Oh my gosh, I can't see you like that, because they grew up with me, and that's all that they can see. They don't really know. And a lot of times, like, it can be our hometown or people who love us the most are the ones who can like put us in this little box, and then we can't get out. But when you have people, like when I'm saying, like, I believe in you, and you have other people who go, hey, I see God has some big things for you, and here's where, and it's not your mom saying it,
right? She says it too. But no, it's not just my mom saying it.
You know what I mean? That's when you start to take notice, and you go, okay, I think God is at work. But I go back to my original point, like, you really discover that when you're reaching out and you're seeking counsel from people who you trust,
right?
Who care about you and want to see God work in what you're doing,
Absolutely.
So, very cool. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, man. So I think, to me, just to kind of bring this thing to an end,
sure,
this is kind of what this podcast is going to be all about. I want to have ministry leaders on here. I'm going to have musicians on here. I'm going to have entrepreneurs on here, leaders, whether it be church leaders or leaders in business, or even every once in a while, leaders in maybe even government. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know. I'm going to make a short list of people I have on here, but I'm really interested in like how God works and moves in what they do, how their faith kind of leads them in things. And, we talked about how we got into things today. And then of course I'll be able to interject my own stuff from time to time. So, but you will forever be the first guest on the Josh Huisman Podcast.
Well, thanks for even letting me be on here and do it. And talk to you and be able to share my story in a way that might be able to help somebody else, or even make an impact, or just for someone to listen to learn more. It's awesome.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Well, appreciate this. And even the coolness of the camera switching and all that automatic stuff. I mean, you pull all that stuff together, and man, you do great work, but you're an even better preacher. So that's good. That was good that we had that. So, hey, just want to tell everybody to click and subscribe to the YouTube page, the YouTube channel. That's the proper way to say it. And also, we're streaming on all the different platforms and everything. So please subscribe to that, the Josh Huisman Podcast. We're going to drop new episodes every Monday. And so go ahead there and be a part of what's going on. We got some great guests coming. And I'm sure I'm going to have you on again, because you're going to be kind of like my sidekick every once in a while, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that'd be good. Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. And we will see you next week on the Josh Huisman Podcast.